So I guess, I mean, we've got about 30 minutes and I'm aware that many people have got Zoom fatigue. I think that we're in a space and it's late as well, so people might be going to bed. So this isn't about a talk that's exposing and raw, but I hope it's a conversation to start many conversations, really, and for me to share a little bit about my experiences, but also I've brought a few different things maybe that I can share around sort of managing if you're feeling worried and the overwhelm, and ending the session on just a little bit of a relaxation exercise, just to wind ourselves down at the end, if that suits everybody. That's all right. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So I'm Naomi Mwasambili. I was born in Yorkshire, Bradford. I'm half Tanzanian, half Jamaican. My mother was born in the UK, in Bradford as well, and she's of Jamaican heritage, and my father was born in Tanzania, and came over here in the 80s, met my mum. I won't go into detail about their relationship because we're recording, but yeah, and had me and my sister, and we grew up. And I guess I always talk about my journey in working in mental health definitely stemmed from my family experiences. So my grandma had mental health problems. She spent the majority of her life in an institution, in my opinion probably diagnosed inappropriately. Well, definitely diagnosed inappropriately, like many people were in the 60s. And when we talk about trauma and pain, sometimes trauma and pain is pathologized and made into a mental illness, and we are not able to really get to the core of why that happened. And I believe that that's my grandma's experience. And generationally, then that had a knock-on impact on my family. And so we didn't talk about mental health when we were younger. I don't think the conversation ever really came up, but I'm nosy, and so I went and then I studied psychology, and so that was, I guess, my way of learning to study. Wasn't around connecting myself, but to study. So I moved to Liverpool and studied psychology in early 2000s. And then stayed in Liverpool for a few years, working with young people and youth offending teams and setting up creative projects for them. I worked in research, so I was developing screening processes for health and mental health in prisons for adults and young people and evaluating them, and felt really detached because everybody I was coming across often were expressing different points of pain that they'd experienced in their lives that hadn't been resolved, and so therefore had ended up in prison or ended up doing things or being caught doing things that were as a result of that pain. So I became more and more interested in thinking about how I could support people. And so I then moved down to London, down to Hackney, and trained as a psychological therapist. And so there was a wave of time in 2008 where the government decided they were going to train loads of people in cognitive behavioural therapy, which is a type of therapy that's very individualistic and sort of supports people think about their thoughts and their behaviours. And I was also specialist African and Caribbean therapist. So my role there was also to develop culturally adapted therapies in Hackney. And so I guess that was the point where I thought, because I was recruited to do that work, I would be able to do that work. But actually, as it turned out, I was placed within Stoke Newington, which, if you know the layout of Hackney, probably isn't the place where the majority of people from African and Caribbean backgrounds are from, and had to fight to do the work. So that was a point where I started working with a lot of community organisations. We set up Black men's therapy groups, we set up anger groups, but personally for me, I loved the clinical work, but I really just didn't like the structure of the health service that I was working within. And I think what I felt and what I found was the fact that, you know, we were being trained and taught how to support people in a certain way, but that was completely at odds with my personal lived experience and also the experience that I was connecting to with the many people that I was working with. And so I guess I became a bit disillusioned with it and started doing my own thing, which, you know, didn't say that. So I read a lot around African-centered therapy, narrative therapy, and different approaches, and I guess taught myself, and then started to find like-minded people who were doing and practicing in that kind of way. And after that, I got a new job within South London, the Maudsley. So I worked as a community development worker, and I set up a community development service in their primary care mental health service. So a lot of the work I did there was out in the community. So it was working with a range of projects, from healthcare projects, community art projects, looking at how the work that they were doing could be measured in a way that could be comparable to the support that was provided in the health service, because it's not just like sitting and talking to someone in a darkened room that's helpful. It's the way we connect with other people. It's the music that we hear, it's the art that we hear. But often there were sort of like small organizations that were doing amazing work, but it wasn't seen at the same level as the NHS. So I became more interested in, I guess, the community side of work. And again, was doing a lot of culturally adapted work with Vietnamese communities, with Caribbean communities, with French-speaking African communities, East African communities, translating, but also looking at how we could work at managing trauma and exploring trauma in a different kind of way and healing people. And my journey sort of is marred with frustration, because I get frustrated with services and systems quite a lot for a range of different reasons. And so then I decided to leave the health service and set up a social enterprise. So I set up a social enterprise in London called Community Therapies and Training Services, which just rolls off your tongue. CTTS. And it did what it said. I wanted to provide community-based psychological therapies and training. So we worked across South London, we worked with the NHS, and because I'd had links with the NHS, I probably knew how to navigate that system a little bit more to work there. We worked with housing associations, we received funding, so we trained up 50 people from African and Caribbean communities as community champions, and we developed training programs, and then I burnt myself out. So like many people on this call, if you're running an organization or you're freelancing, you know, you martyr yourself to the cause sometimes. And, you know, you're always thinking. I was always thinking, and I was driven by my passion and my excitement, but often supporting a lot of people around me and didn't have the support for myself. And even when I'd express it, people just were like, oh, she's so articulate. Even if she's saying that she's like breaking, it's great, you know, she's so articulate, and wouldn't hear or didn't want to hear how to help. So around 2014, I just ended up hating and I talk about, you know, I didn't like mental health, I didn't like the service, I didn't like what was happening, but I still had to smile, because you do when you're running a service, you've still got to get up and smile and keep going. I just had to sort of step back and think. And personally, I was going through a personal breakup, because our lives still continue around us. And my life and relationships have probably been marred with mental ill health as well, with people who I choose to be in relationships with. And so that's always going on in the background. You know, people think work's there, but it's all linked. And I think I was just personally quite lost as well. And I never was given the space to talk about it. I can talk about it now because I'm detached, but it was just a horrible year. I was having panic attacks, and I knew this stuff, you know, I'd trained in it. So, you know, if you're trained in it, you should know how to deal with things, and you should know how to work through things, but we're all human. And our human experiences means that we will have pain, and situations will become overwhelming at different times, and we've got to be able to find the space to be able to connect with people. So that was me. So stepped back and reconnected with a friend who I studied with, and we set up Chinua. And at that point, I think I was very focused around wanting to be able to work on projects that were passionate to me, but also things that could generate as an income as an organization, and think about prevention at the core and early stage, but also be able to embed some of our beliefs around culturally appropriate work as well. So Chinua means to blossom. It's a Swahili word for blossoming, and so I guess we believe like our projects are sort of like seedlings, and we like to blossom and then let them go out into the ether, maybe into other areas. So we work on some for profit and not for profit projects. some around training, some with young people. We look at how technology can be used in a human-centered way, how we can facilitate human connection in this world that we live in that often is disconnecting us. So I run that organization, as well as doing a range of other different things. I've just recently come back from Tanzania. We're setting up like an eco lodge project over there. And so I'm very interested in, as you maybe know if you know me, in gardening and thinking about how we can be more self-sustainable with our body and how we eat as well. So a big project that we've been working on, because actually I think from COVID, I was in Tanzania in January, and I'd gone over there, and coming back over there, they were taking it more seriously a lot earlier, actually. So when I went over there, they were screening us at the airport. So I was very probably aware of it when I came back. And so we approached some of our partners that we were working with and said, you know, what's happening, what are you doing for young people, of which not many people had a idea as to what was going to happen. And so in early March, we started to develop a platform called NeuroLove. And the purpose of that was to create a space where young people could stay virtually connected in a way that we were being separated. So we have like this online platform where you can get therapy, get mentoring, do workshops to support your mental health and well-being, support young people's mental health and well-being. So that's a little bit, I guess, around my story personally and professionally. Oh, whereabouts in Tanzania? So I can see some questions there. And if anybody has any questions like throughout, please feel free to ask them. And I'll go on to sort of like talking a little bit about different things that maybe you can do for yourselves around this time as well in mental health. My family are from a range. So I'm Mwasambili. So my last name is Nakusa. It's an area called Mbeya in the Southern Highlands in Tanzania. So my grandfather was Nakusa, my grandmother was Hehe, but my family is massive. So I won't go into too much detail. My grandma had 13 children. She bore 13 children. And she was one of 16. So my grandma actually converted from being a Muslim to Christianity. And so she had 16 siblings, and her father had a brother and he had 22. So there's a lot, and they're in a lot of places. So yeah, a lot of people to remember, but always somewhere to stay. Yeah. So yeah, that answers the question of whereabouts in Tanzania. And I do work, so for the past 10 years I've been going back to Tanzania as well to do training and to provide support around mental health there. And I think my first experience in 2010, I was arrogant and thought, you know what, I've been trained, I can go over and put together a program. And I was humbled because it was the first point where I was just like, I am taking my Western principles, even though I think I'm very woke and very African-centered, to Tanzania, which actually this is not the way it works. And actually what I need to do is I need to be learning a lot more from there and bringing that here as well. So I think that experience humbled me in a way to think about my practice and think about ways that we can learn from some of our historical and more indigenous ways of nurturing and looking after ourselves, and they're not seen sometimes as credible, and no one's going to be putting them forward to you, and so we have to do the work to be able to explore them and to find out more about them as well. And that, you know, stems from us being a collective, you know, us being in this together and not always being individual in our journey, which we are taught to be. And you know, when we're holding pain, it's our pain, but actually we know from we look at intergenerational experiences, we're holding our grandparents and our generation pain, and that's a heavy burden for us to hold, especially when we're trying to survive in a hostile world in different ways as well. And so, you know, we've got to be able to connect with each other and not see ourselves as an individual and as a self, and be able to then know how we can ask for help and receive it, and also provide it. And that's something that I'm definitely still on a journey on, because I'm very much about, I can look after myself, I've got to be strong, I've got to deal with these things, I've got to do everything myself. And when you do ask and you don't get the response you want, that just fulfills my belief around the fact that I'm on my own. And I think that's one of the core things around our mental health and our mental well-being that's so key, that we can't solve the problems in isolation. We can't think about things in a different way when we're on our own. It requires it requires other people, and so those safe spaces are really, really important for us to have, like this, individually and as a group, and to create, just to share our stories, and to share different ways that we've found to solve different issues that we have. And so I sometimes have like anti-COVID days, because I think we're so overwhelmed with this media's fear that it keeps putting upon us, but there's also a very realistic situation that it's shifted and changed in how we run our organizations, how we get paid for different things. And I think that, you know, a lot of people have been left in an area of uncertainty, and financial uncertainty, but also emotional uncertainty as well. And then for others, it's been so freeing because they haven't had to be around people, or they haven't had the pressure of being around people, and they've had the space to think. And the space to think can be quite scary as well, because we're so busy in life often, and we busy ourselves up. But actually then, you know, having that space to think, okay, am I doing what I want to do? And is this the life I want to lead? And some of those big questions that we neglect to ask when we're constantly busy and doing different things. And so the reason why I didn't want to go head deep into how to manage anxiety, how to get a good night's sleep, because it seems quite simplistic. However, it's important as well. So I have got like information and slides that I can send to you around sort of like how to manage those worries when you're going off to sleep, and how to switch off, which can be useful and quite helpful. And also just understanding sleep patterns, especially when our routine shifts and changes, and how to get that back in a way that works. So what I will do, because I'm aware of the time, is I'm going to share those, but also I'd like to create a space if anybody wanted to go through them with me, to talk through those things as well. So I'm happy to do that. So that's a bit, I guess, about me. And what I'd like to do is just open the floor for any questions that you might have, or things that, you know, might be on your mind that you want answering, or you want to have a discussion about now within this time and space, if that's okay.